Everyone. So this will serve as a pre-recorded video pertaining to our next topic in human anatomy and physiology, and that would be human digestive system. So here we will be discussing the function, the major structure of the system, and also the major organs of the system. Not only that, we will be focusing also with the accessory organs that can be found in the system. So with that, let's start to know the overview or the main topic that we will be discussing in this system. As I've said a while ago, we will be much more focused on the major organs that can be found and located with this system, and that was the mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and the large intestine. Not only that, we will be focusing also with the accessory organs that is located in this kind of system, and these are the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. So moving forward, of course, in any other introduction for a topic, we have to explain the function or the definition of digestive system. So literally, it is just a process of reducing food into smaller molecules that can be absorbed into the body. So in an easiest way, it is likely can be connected can be connected with the word digestion. So if respiratory system has it is also known with the function of respiration. Here in digestive is the main function of it is for digestion. So meaning to say, this kind of system includes your mouth, your throat, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and so on and so forth. Not only that, what is the major function of this is to make digestive juices and enzymes that help the body digest food and liquids. So meaning to say, in digestion, you can get nutrients and minerals from the food. So that is the process digestive system. So there are two major parts of human digestive system: the major organs and the accessory organs. So I've already mentioned that one. So let's move forward with the major organs. So your mouth has actually a pH scale, or a neutral pH scale, which is 7. The first part of digestive system is your mouth. It is the entry point of the food. Meaning, when we say a mouth, it is usually described as an oval-shaped cavity inside the skull, and it has two functions. What is the two function of the mouth? Number one is for eating and speaking, and number two, it is for and number two, these are the parts of the mouth first. So the mouth included the lips, vestibule, mouth cavity, gums, teeth, hard and soft palate, tongue, and even the salivary glands. So aside from the major function of the mouth is for eating and speaking, mouth is also known as the oral cavity or the vocal cavity. So in our previous topic, we usually tell the terminology of the mouth as an oral or vocal. So meaning to say, the area of the mouth is your oral cavity and your vocal cavity. So now let's move forward with the structure in the mouth that aids digestion. So what are those parts of the mouth that can help with the process of digestion? What are those? We have number one is the teeth. Our teeth will cut, tear, crush, and grind food. So meaning to say, when we swallow and chew a food, number one aspect or number one parts of the mouth that can help pertaining in digestion is our teeth. Number two is the salivary glands. So this is produce and secrete saliva into the oral cavity. So why we have saliva in our mouth? Because of the salivary glands. And it's very important to have a salivary glands to produce what? Of course, to produce and secrete what? Our saliva. Okay, so saliva in this term explains as the moist. It can moisten our food. It contains enzyme called ptyalin or salivary amylase, and it begins digestion of starch into smaller polysaccharides. So polysaccharide actually is the major classification of carbon dioxide. When we say polysaccharide, it is 10 to more than sugars presented in a kind of a food. That's why it belongs to carbohydrates, or one good macromolecules in our body, which is carbohydrates. That's why saliva is very important, because saliva can digest a starch, and starch is one good example of polysaccharide. So what are those major function of this major organs is that, or the structure of the mouth is that, number one, it it is for mechanical digestion. Number two, increasing surface area for faster chemical digestion. So that is the major organ of or major function of the mouth. Okay, so let's go back first with the enzyme, the thiolin and salivary amylase. So, meaning if you're trying to define what is this, thia, thiolin, or also known as salivary amylase, is a enzyme. This is usually a gland that secretes the most important enzyme in the mouth. So thiolin main job is to catalyze the conversion of starch to maltose and dextrin. So meaning to say this particularly area here we have terms like starch, maltose and dextrin. This is much more particularly on the carbohydrates. Sorry. So that's why the digestion, it can help the starch into to smaller pieces or to be digested in saliva because usually we ate starch or we ate sugar too much. So, ano ang makakatulong sa atin to digest that one? We have the saliva. Not only the saliva and not only the digestion of the starch. Sorry, it also contains enzyme, and that enzyme also helps us to what? Digest the starch that is gained from what? Polysaccharide. Okay? So what do you mean by mechanical digestion? When we say mechanical digestion, for you to know, this is particularly on breaking down food substances into smaller particles to more efficiently undergo chemical digestion. That's why mouth is basically the major function of the mouth is to have it is a mechanical digestion because the mouth is the one who actually breaking down or tear the substances into smaller particles. Okay? So that is the major organs, which is the mouth. So now let's move forward with the esophagus. Esophagus is a tube connecting the mouth to the stomach. It is a running through the thoracic. It actually runs through the thoracic cavity. Esophagus is a tubular. That's why it runs through the mouth to the thoracic cavity because it is a tube or tubular elongated organ of the digestive system which connects the pharynx to the stomach and which connects pharynx to the stomach, which is basically located in the thoracic cavity. So esophagus basically is the organ that food travels through, yung parang tube, yung parang lining from your esophagus to your pharynx to your stomach. So that is a tube and that is called esophagus. So what is the location of the esophagus? Of course, it lies behind the windpipe or trachea. So that's why I've said yesterday that there is a connection between the respiratory system and digestive system. It also the trachea, or the location also of it, is the trachea has an epiglottis. We've already know what is epiglottis all about. And aside from that, it prevents food from entering the windpipe, moving the food to the esophagus while swallowing. So the major function of the epiglottis in the trachea is for the food to move out, and it will not pass through the trachea, but hence it will pass through to the esophagus or the tube. Okay, so now let's move forward with this. So as you can see here, this is an illustration of the digestion pertaining to the esophagus. So the food travels down the esophagus through a series of involuntary rhythmic construction, and that is called, or as we all know, it is, or in an easiest way, it is called wave-like structure, and it is called peristalsis. So basically, in an easiest way, or in a easiest explanation about peristalsis, aside from it is an involuntary rhythmic construction, it makes digestion possible. Why? Because it what moves food, any fluids, through each stage of digestive process. So without peristalsis, we could neither eat nor poop. Okay, so meaning to say, we cannot eat, we cannot poop if there is no peristalsis. Okay, so the major function of it is the lining of esophagus secrete mucus or lubricating, and also to support the movement of the food. So that is the major function of the peristalsis. Okay, so that is pertaining to the esophagus. Again, when we say esophagus, it's basically a tube connecting the mouth to the stomach, and it runs to your thoracic cavity. It is a passageway of your food. Food enters esophagus, not trachea. Okay, so that is esophagus. So now let's move forward to the another term that we will be figuring out in esophagus, and that is esophageal sphincter. So in esophageal sphincter, it is the bolus reaches the stomach. Okay, what do you mean by that? So when we say a bolus, it's basically a small rounded mass of a substance, especially when you chew the food at the moment of swallowing. That is the bolus. Okay, so when the bolus actually entered or reaches the stomach, it will pass through a muscular wing valve called the esophageal sphincter. So when we say esophageal sphincter, it is a valve that a passageway of the bolus. When we say bolus, again, it is a small rounded mass of substances that, especially of chewed food at the moment of swallowing. So that is bolus. And the major function of esophageal sphincter is to prevent stomach acids from backflowing into the esophagus. Why? Because it is a valve. When we say valve, it is a muscular valve that protecting you from having stomach acids, preventing you to have stomach acid, kasi when you reach stomach acid it will be a bad issue with your esophagus. Okay, so that would be esophageal sphincter. So now let's move forward to the stomach. So stomach is very known. When we say digestive, number one organ that we will be always be reminded is the stomach. Stomach is a J shape, as you can see here. It's like a J, it's like a letter J. J-shaped muscular sac. It has inner folds called rugae, and it increasing surface area of the stomach. So one good function of the stomach is to perform mechanical digestion. So other than mouth, we have also stomach to have to break down the nutrients and minerals that we can get to the food. How? By churning the bolus and mixing it with the gastric juices. So that is the reason, or the reason why stomach can perform mechanical digestion. It also secreted by the lining of the stomach. And when we say gastric juices, it is actually a unique combination of hydrochloric acid and lipase, and of course another one is pepsin. So the main function of the gastric juices is to inactivate swallowed microorganism, thereby which is inhibiting infectious agents from reaching the intestine. So that is the major function of gastric juices. So here we also have salt, enzyme, water, and mucus, and of course the hydrogen or the hydrochloric acid helps to break down of the food and kills bacteria that came along with the food and prevent it to reach in our intestine. So the bolus is now called chyme. Okay, so when we say chyme or the bolus, it is a acidic fluid that passes through the stomach to the small intestine, and it usually consisting of gastric juices and partly digested food. So now if the food now enters the stomach, it is called a chyme. Okay, because it is a pulpy acidic fluid. Okay, so that is pertaining to the organ stomach. Okay, let's move forward to the enzyme that can leads or that is located to the stomach. So we have acidic environment. We have also the hydrochloric secretion. When we say hydrochloric secretion, it is much more focused on killing microorganism. So the pH scale of it, since it is acidic, of course, it is number 2. Mucus prevents the stomach from digesting itself. So when we say mucus, it is much more particular on semi-permeable surface lining. So it is like an outer layer. So we have also a pepsin secretion. It is much more responsible for initiating the breakdown of proteins such as food and hydrolysis lyses proteins to yield polypeptides. So the major pH of potential hydrogen pertaining to pepsin secretion is also 2 because it's still acidic. The enzyme from the salivary gland stops breaking down the carbohydrate. So that is pertaining on the enzyme in our stomach. So to give emphasis with these two acid or these two enzyme, when we say hydrochloric acid, just to for you to know it more deeply, when we say hydrochloric acid, it is usually secreted from the gastric parietal cell. It usually generates a strong acidic environment of your gastric. So when it releases a strong acidic environment, it can kill food. It can kill food derived bacteria, or it can kill what? It can kill microorganisms. So that is particularly on the hydrochloric secretion or hydrochloric acid secretion. So in pepsin secretion naman is when we say pepsin secretion, it is usually a stomach enzyme that serves to digest proteins found in ingested food. So meaning to say it is actually a secretion of proteins that you can be found when you ingested or when you try to eat a food. Okay? So that is the differences between the enzyme in the stomach. What are those? We have hydrochloric acid secretion and we have pepsin secretion. We also have pyloric sphincter. So pyloric sphincter is usually the chyme or the bolus moves from the stomach to the small intestine. It passes through a muscular ridge sphincter called the pyloric sphincter. So when we say pyloric sphincter, it is actually a passageway or the exit of the chyme or the bolus. When we say bolus or the chyme, it is usually the pulpy acidic fluid that enters your body. Okay, so that is 3 enzymes in your stomach. So now stomach does not digest itself. Why? Because it has protective mechanism. What are those? There are 3 protective mechanism. First, the stomach only secretes small amounts of gastric. Second, the secretion of mucus coats the lining of the stomach, protecting it, the gastric juices. And the third mechanism is to digest. Digestive enzyme pepsin is secreted in an inactive protein called pepsinogen, or pepsinogen is a converted to pepsin in the increased presence of hydrochloric acid, which is level 1, which is acid. Okay, so basically it will digest, or it will digest, not typically digest itself because it has many factors to be transport with. Malami siyang pagdadaanan, like it's somewhat a breaking down food by each organ. So that's why it's called protective mechanism, or that's why it's called mechanism digestion, because it's much more focused on the digestion of food through the different location in, or the different organ or parts in the digestive system. Okay, let's move forward with the type or the parts of the stomach, and that is small intestine. Small intestine basically is responsible for the complete digestion of all macromolecules. So meaning to say, small intestine is the one who actually helps us to digest our macromolecules. So what are those macromolecules presented in our body? These are the carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acid, and the carbohydrates. Okay, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, nucleic acid. We have 4 major macromolecules. And what particular organ in the digestive can help us to digest that one? That is small intestine. And of course, other than responsibility of digesting the macromolecules, small intestine also used to absorb what? Component of molecules. Like for example, these are actually components that can be found in our macromolecules. Number 1, the glucose or the sugar in the blood, that is particularly in the carbohydrate. We also have the glycerol, which is accompanied with the fatty acid. It's somewhat belongs to to the macromolecules called lipids. Then we also have amino acid. It is somewhat related to the proteins. Why? Because protein, the building blocks of protein is amino acid. And we also have nucleotides. It is much more located in the nucleic acid because the building blocks of nucleic acid is nucleotides. Okay, moving forward. So these are the parts of the small intestine. So the small intestine is made up of three parts. We have duodenum, jejunum, and the ileum. So we will be discussing that one by one. So as you can see here in the small intestine, it's like a pipe, diba? Okay, so now let's move forward. So now let's discuss what is duodenum. Duodenum is the first part of the small intestine, and it is usually a U shape. It is approximately 30 centimeter in length, and this area completes most of the digestion process. Why? Because it is called as the first first part of small intestine. So when it is the first part, it is the entrance of your food. So in that area, it is easily for you to digest the food, and it completes also the digestion in that area. So enzymes are secreted into the duodenum and form the pancreas and the gallbladder. So as I mentioned a while ago, pancreas and the gallbladder is your accessory organs. So the duodenum is lined by folds of tissue. Fold of tissue, when we say fold of tissue, it is a membranous surface lining or protected by tissue or connected tissue, and that is called villi. So the villi actually covered by fine brush-like called microvilli. And this fold increases the surface area of the small intestine, increases the rate of absorption. So that is pertaining to the duodenum. So to explain it more, when we say duodenum, it basically helps to further digest food coming from your stomach. It usually absorbs what? Nutrients, like for example, vitamins, minerals, your macromolecules like carbohydrates, fats, or even the proteins. All of that will absorb in the part or in the organ which is called small intestine. Okay? Other than that, it also have the absorption of water from food, so they can be used by the body. So that is the major function of the duodenum. So now let's move forward with the jejunum. So jejunum is approximately 2.5 meter long. If the duodenum, as you can see, if we compare the sizes between the two, duodenum is much more larger than jejunum. Okay, jejunum. So why? Because 3 meter for duodenum and 2.5 meter long for jejunum. Okay. Although some digestion is completed here, it has more villi and microvilli. Its role is absorption or nutrients. Okay. So here in jejunum, there is much more thing do here in this area kasi the process of digestion is already been done in duodenum. So here in jejunum, ano lang mas ang nangyayari? Mas dumadami lang ang villi and microvilli. So as we know, villi and microvilli is particularly a tissue or surface lining of the duodenum. It is a fold. Okay? So now, what is the major function of jejunum? Okay, so the major function of jejunum, so since it is the middle part of the small intestine, so the process digestion is already been done in the first part, which is the duodenum. Here, it helps only to further digest food coming from the stomach. So that is the help of jejunum to duodenum. And the last part is ileum. So ileum is approximately 3 m long. It is somewhat the same with the duodenum. Has fewer villi and microvilli. So the surface lining or the protection part of the ileum is much more lesser than the jejunum and the duodenum. Although the absorption also occurs here, it is responsible for pushing the waste materials into large intestine. So here, since the process is already been done in duodenum, in jejunum, the process is there, but we can see much more villi and microvilli in that area, in the middle intestine. While in the ileum, the absorption has been done, so meaning to say the waste product will be what? releases. So, saan siya ma-release? Papuntang large intestine. So, that is the three major part of the small intestine. So, as you can see here, this is the area of the duodenum, jejunum, and the ileum. So from the color itself, red one and the yellow one. So that is the illustration pertaining to these three major parts of the small intestine. So now, let's move forward with the function of the small intestine. So here, function, it is 90% of digestion. I've already told that one. Other than that, it 10% taking place with stomach and large intestine. The main function of small intestine is to absorb nutrients. I've already done that one. I've already discussed that one or tell that one. So here in the small intestine, we have also digestion of the protein. So what particular protein has been digested in this particular organ? We have the protein, which is peptides and amino acid, are acted upon by enzymes such as trypsin and chymotrypsin, secreted by the accessory organ, which is called pancreas. So this breaks them down to smaller peptides. Okay? So that is happen pertaining to how can we digest protein in the small intestine. So to explain further what is this peptides and amino acid, this is basically a protein, okay, a sample protein. So here in the small intestine, the protein can be digested if once a protein source reaches your stomach, hydrochloric acid and enzyme called proteases break it down into smaller chains of amino acid. So as you can see here, we have amino acid. Amino acid are joined together by the peptides. Peptides is one good example of the protein. Once it is broken down by the proteases from your stomach, this smaller chain of amino acid move into your small intestine. So that is a flow on how the digestion of protein begins in your stomach, then it will releases to your small intestine. Next, we have digestion of lipids. So here, the enzymes like lipase secreted from the pancreas act on fats and lipids in diet. So meaning to say, the particular enzymes that located in the digestion of lipid is lipase, okay, or lipases. Okay, so wait lang, let me discuss first what is enzyme. Baka kasi I literally always mention enzyme that you did not know what is it. So basically, when we say enzyme, it is usually a protein that helps speed up chemical reaction in our body. It is very essential in what way? In digestion, liver function, and much more. So that's why enzyme is very important inside our body, and that's why enzyme is being included in digestion. So the lipase can break them into the smaller parts that can enter the intestinal villi for absorption. So that is how the digestion of lipids begins in the small intestine. So now let's proceed to the digestion of carbohydrates. What happened to the digestion of carbohydrates here in the small intestine? It's much, meaning to say here in the carbohydrates, if in the lipids is much more fats, in the carbohydrates, it will broken down what? Of course, since carbohydrates is much more on the sources of energy, meaning to say, it explains that it broken down to simple sugars like monosaccharide, or like one good example of it is a glucose or your blood sugar. Monosaccharide is only one sugar, okay? So in pancreatic amylase, this is particularly on another enzyme, breaks down some carbohydrates to oligosaccharide. When we say oligosaccharide, it is fewer from 10 up to 100,000 sugars. So meaning to say, in pancreatic amylase, when pancreatic amylase, which is the enzyme, it is the one who helps to break down the sugar to what? 10 to 100 times, and that is for oligosaccharide. So some carbohydrates and fibers pass undigested to the large intestines, where they may, depending on their type, be broken down by intestinal bacteria. So here, after the digestion, it will, of course, in digestion of carbohydrates, after all of that, it will also release or been done again in the large intestine. So that is particularly on the digestion of carbohydrates. So now, let's talk about the absorption of small intestine. So, as we all know, the absorption of small intestine begins with nutrients. Okay, nutrients absorbed by process, simple passive diffusion, facilitated diffusion, primary active. All of that is actually a transportation on how the food on how the nutrients absorbed by the small intestine. Sorry. So this, for transportation, nutrients commonly rely upon here. So from the lipids, they undergo passive or simple diffusion. From the short chain fatty acid, they undergo diffusion. Amino acid, primary active transport. Glucose, secondary active transport. Fructose, facilitated diffusion. So, let's discuss first what is this kind of transportation. Baka you will be having a you will be confused in this area. So simple and passive diffusion is particular. When we say simple, it is a molecules that can cross to the plasma membrane. When no no no, it is a molecules that can cross to the plasma membrane. It is a passive diffusion. Okay, passive diffusion usually cross your plasma membrane. So we've already know what is plasma membrane, right? So it is a molecules that simply dissolve in phospholipid bilayer or diffuses across it. So that is passive diffusion. And when we say simple diffusion, it basically refers to the random movement of molecules in a liquid. So that is pertaining to passive and simple diffusion. So now let's move forward with diffusion. When we say diffusion, literally it is a net movement of anything. For example, an atom, an ion, a molecules, or a particle, or an energy, that is diffusion. So meaning to say, if you're literally explaining the movement of each particles, that is diffusion. Okay? So we have also primary active transport and secondary active transport. What is this? So primary active transport is also called as direct active transport. Why? Because they directly uses chemical energy to transport all species of all species. So that is the definition of primary active transport. Direct active transport kasi usually they directly uses chemical energy to transport all the species. Okay? So when we say chemical energy, it possesses what? ATP or adenosine triphosphate. Okay? So now we have secondary active transport. So secondary active transport, it is usually defined as the transport of solute in the direction of increasing chemical potential. Okay? So when we say chemical process, so when we say secondary active transport, it is usually a transportation of solute. When we say solute, it is a part of a solution. Why? Because in a solution we have solute and solvent. Solvent is the one who dissolves the solute. Meaning to say, solvent is usually the liquid. When you say solute, it is usually the solid material or those material that can be dissolved by water. So that is secondary active transport. Then we also have facilitated diffusion. Here, it is a passive movement of molecules along the concentration or the concentration of the liquid. So that is pertaining on the transportation. So all of this is a transportation that makes the absorption of nutrients in the small intestine. So how in segregating the nutrients, it included what? Macromolecules. Kasali yan sila. So, ano yung mga transportation ng meron sila? Pag sinabing lipids, it is much more on passive and simple diffusion. Pag sinabing short chain fatty acid, it is much more on diffusion. Amino acid, primary active transport. Glucose, secondary active transport. And fructose, facilitated diffusion. So, that is pertaining on how the nutrients can be absorbed by the small intestine. Next, we also have other absorbed substances in the small intestine include what? Of course, the water. Water is 80% absorbed in the small intestine, 10% in the large intestine. So remaining 10% is excreted in the feces. So feces is usually the water matter discharged from the bowels after the food has been digested. Again, when we say feces, it is a waste matter discharged from the bowels after the food has been digested. So we also have electrolytes and vitamins and minerals. So this is basically on the nutrients that has been absorbed in the small intestine. So it's not only the macromolecules, the nutrients, it also absorbed by water and the minerals. Okay? So let's move. Let's move now to the large intestine.